On page 3 of your packet, this is the back. This is number 15. We're almost finished. Because you typically have limited space, and I've been giving you videos that show it kind of dragging out from out to the right, and that's typically not the amount of space that you have. I'm going to show you sort of some workarounds that I typically do that might be helpful in some of these problems, just so that you can kind of conserve space. If you're conserving space but getting it wrong, just get separate paper and work it out on your own paper, okay? It's not, you haven't done yourself any favors if you're still getting it wrong. But the strategy is still the same, and so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to factor 2r squared minus 5r minus 3. So I'm looking for what are the factors of, remember 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, that add up to negative 5. And I believe that the factors would be negative 6 and 1, correct? Because negative 6 times 1 would give you negative 6, but negative 6 plus 1 would give you negative 5. Now, I'm going to show you what I do when I'm basically factoring above or below. Well, first of all, let me just start factoring it. I'm going to change this, the 2r squared plus 5r minus 3. I'm focusing because our strategy for adding and subtracting is to look at denominators only at the beginning. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2r squared, okay, and the minus 3 is still going to come down. But minus 5r, I'm going to rewrite that. Like negative 5r, you could write it as negative 2r plus negative 3r, or you could write it negative 7r plus 2r, but that wouldn't make sense. This tells you what does make sense, because if you wrote negative 5r as negative 6r plus 1r, okay? By the way, hopefully on this video I'll figure out how to do a pop-up so that you can go to a different video that will link you to why I'm factoring this way, because I know that different people have like different kind of funky stuff that you do with your X. Hopefully you'll get to watch that video. I'm factoring a different way. If you have a better way, or you like a different way to factor better than what I'm about to do, then just do that. All right, as soon as I've totally replaced this, any expression with something else, I mark through it so I don't forget. I just rewrote that trinomial as actually 4 parts. Now I'm going to factor this in this funky way, but it's a way that works great. I do this in pairs. I look first at the first 2 and ask myself, what can I factor out of that? Well, both of those have a 2 as a factor, and they both also have an r. So that leaves me with r minus 3 in parentheses. So 2r times r minus 3 is what that is equivalent to. And then I look at this and see what could I factor. The only thing I can factor, because they're both prime, is a 1. Can factor a 1 out, and 1r divided by 1 is still r. And negative 3 divided by 1 is negative 3. So what I have is I've replaced that, and remember the strategy I just told you. Mark through it when you've replaced it, because I've got a whole new thing right here that is now an equivalent. Okay, so my denominator is this now. Now you'll notice that both of these terms, and this is all one term because it's glued together by multiplication, have a factor of r minus 3, which means I can actually factor r minus 3 out. R minus 3, if I factored it out from that, I end up with 2r. And I factor out from that, I end up with plus 1. So what I just did was factor that trinomial, and that trinomial factors to r minus 3 times 2r plus 1. Okay? Now, keep in mind, we are looking at denominators. Ignore numerators. I'm still in the factor, well, just finished factor mode. And I'm looking to see, what does the denominator on the left have that the right has? So I have who has. On the left, you've got an r minus 3. On the right, you've got an r minus 3. Now look on the left, you have a 2r plus 1. On the right, you don't, which means right here, you've got to multiply by 2r plus 1. Remember, it gets parentheses over 2r plus 1, and it gets parentheses. So I've got this thing in the top. I do have common denominators now, so I've got I've got a different thing in the top over here, but the bottoms are the same. So I'm going to rewrite all of it over that common denominator. The common denominator is r minus 3 times 2r plus 1. And now I just do the math in the top, and remember, you're not factoring until the very, very end in the numerator ever. So I've got r squared plus 8r minus 12. Remember that all of that, negative and the 3, is going to be distributed across 2r plus 1. So negative 3 times 2r is negative 6r. Negative 3 times 1 is minus 3. Okay, so now I'm going to simplify, and here we go. I'm looking for like terms. R squared, there's not one. I've got a plus 8r and a minus 6r, which means I've got a plus 2r. And then I've got a minus 12, minus 3, which is minus 15. And so keep in mind, once I've completely replaced it, I mark through it. Okay, so I've got r squared plus 2r minus 15 over the two binomials in the denominator. And the last thing I need to figure out is, what are the factors of 15 that add up to 2? If I'm not sure, I do a list. 1 times 15, there's no way that could be a 2. 2 times 2 won't work, right? Because 2 doesn't go into 15. 3 times 5, it works. 4, if 2 didn't work, then 4 is not going to work, because 2 is a factor of 4. And then 5 times 3, once my factors loop back around in reverse, then I know that's the complete list. What would give me a positive 2? And that would be an r plus 5. The bigger number would get the positive, and the smaller one would get the negative, because the positive is the one that got to stay. All right, so I've factored that numerator. Once you've replaced it with new factors, I mark through it so I don't get confused. Now I'm just looking for ones, because I've got a numerator and a denominator. R minus 3 over r minus 3 is a 1, which means it does cancel. So in the end, my solution is r plus 5 over 2r plus 1. Now, I'm going to tell you that this method, it's not the best for a lot of reasons, but in limited space, as long as you're careful and write very, very neatly, and always remember to mark out any parts of the expression that you have replaced with factored parts of the expression, you should be okay. But if you have a tendency to get lost in your work, switch to your own paper and do your math separately on different sheets.